Warning. This episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that didn't make it. I'm Hillary B. Bisniaks. On today's episode, the first episode of Season 3 of Tales from the Trunk, we have a very special guest. Kelly Robson is a Nebula and Hugo Award-winning author and author of the forthcoming collection Alias Space. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Thank you. I'm not a Hugo winner, though. I just have to correct you on that.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's okay. Aspiring Hugo winner, you know.
Aspiring Hugo winner. Twice nominated
That's
in
right.
the short story category.
Yeah.
I was doing my research last night, and then I just was like, yeah, Kelly's won Hugo Awards.
No, that's not me. Someday, it's a big dream.
You'll get there.
Yeah, someday, maybe.
Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for being the very first guest of Season 3. When I started this show in 2019, I didn't fully expect that Season 3 would be a thing, but here we are.
Here we are. Thanks for inviting me. It's exciting to be
Absolutely.
talking with another human being that's not on a Zoom call at work.
I know. I mean, we're still on a Zoom call, but...
Yeah, that's okay. This is a friend Zoom call.
Exactly. So, Kelly, you're going to be reading to us from Deadfall, is that correct?
That's right. Yes, Deadfall.
And is there anything that we need to know about that before we get going on it?
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Cool story. Let's see. I guess it was in 2019. You know, the years are just kind of all blending together. Trying
Time
to
is so fake.
It's so fake. So in 2019, my wife Alex, A.M. Dellamonica, and I got invited to go do consulting for some international development types. And basically,
very cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. So we were basically coming into the situation as science fiction writers and got to write off-the-cuff stories for them, drawing on information that they had come up with during their conferences. So,
fabulous.
Yeah, so this story is that, which I was hoping that I would be able to, that I would be able to get somebody to buy afterwards. That didn't happen, so... Here we are.
Such is life occasionally.
Yeah. And I'm going to read you the whole thing. It's, probably the reason why it didn't sell is, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, is that, I was trying my first short.
Oh, yeah.
And so shall I
Let's do it.
get into it? Okay, here we go. Deadfall. Belinda Moberly had spent 9 years patrolling the Saskatchewan River crossing, carrying an old Canadian Forces surplus rifle and riding a sure-footed trail horse. A low-tech approach to protecting Jasper's southern border, but she was fine with that. Better than fine, actually. She loved it. So when her supervisor announced she was being upgraded to hollow-sight semi-automatic and a hover quad, she was not happy. You gotta be kidding. Belinda took a hard drag on her cigarette. She and Dan sat under the canvas tarp beside the fire pit, having a smoke and watching the rain stream off the Warden Station's cliffside howitzer emplacements. Below them, the bombed-out remains of the Icefield Parkway were disappearing under floodwater. Shaw thinks there's a tech solution to patrolling this? She waved at the steep mountainsides across the valley, thick with deadfall. What's the problem? You use tech all the time, Dan said. Do you know how much data you upload every day you're on patrol? Terabytes. This is just a way to do your job better. It's stupid. She was being too blunt, but she'd worked for Dan for a long time. He could take it. If I ride one of those bikes, I'll be a floating target for every pinpoint drone north of Banff. She used the glowing coal on the end of her cigarette to mime one of Stantec's drones, aimed it right at her heart, and circled it with 8 quick staccato blasts. Ping, 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 ping! Belinda's a dead warden. She stuck out her tongue and rolled her eyes back in her head. Then one more drag off the cigarette took the tobacco right down to the filter. She tossed the stub into the rain. All you'll get is some drone jockey down in Lake Louise carving another notch on their cubicle wall. She'd seen what those drones could do, and it was no joke. Detection has been a problem in the past, but Shaw's techies have a new shielding for the bikes. It works. Yeah, I'll believe that when they bring a vice president here to test it. Dan sighed. Listen, Belinda, maybe you don't follow the news, but the water wars are moving upstream. It's not Edmonton versus Calgary anymore. It's Jasper versus Banff, and ground zero is right here at the headwaters of the North Saskatchewan. We do what we're told, right? For Mother Shaw? He waited for her to repeat the slogan, his eyebrows raised. If she didn't, Dan would note it on her employment record, and some HR manager in Edmonton would flag her for hazardous duty. Huh, as if her job wasn't hazardous enough already. For Mother Shaw, she repeated. Truth was, Belinda just really loved her horse. If she couldn't ride, she didn't want to be a park warden anymore. Mistea was a little mare from Kip Kelly's outfit north of Hinton. Pure, fine trail horse. Mistea never stumbled, never slipped, and she could do 20 miles a day on vertical terrain through thick bush and heavy deadfall, picking her way up and down mountain slopes felted with dead Douglas fir, while Belinda scanned the valley with her rifle's laser scope. But the horse didn't just know where to put her feet. Mistea spotted half of Belinda's kills. A flick of the ears, a sudden halt, a turn of her long head on that short, thick neck, and Belinda knew something was out there. Most of the time it was a lone, barren ground caribou, wandering into the mountains looking for lichen. Sometimes it was an Arctic wolf following those few hardy survivors. But sometimes it was a Stantec scout encroaching on Mother Shaw's territory. She let the caribou live always. The wolves, too, of course. Belinda was more than happy to share Jasper with wildlife, but Stantec? Dead meat in her scope every time. Before tucking into her bunk, Belinda visited the stable carved into the side of Mount Wilson and checked on her horse. Mistea whickered and nudged the stall's latch with her nose. Got to stay in, old girl, Belinda said. It's dangerous weather out there, no place for you or me. Like any good trail horse, Mistea hated being inside. No choice, though. For 3 days the rains had been torrential, heavier than Belinda had ever seen. The weather monitors showed liquid precipitation even on the highest peaks. Mount Athabasca, Mount Columbia, Mount Alberta, all inundated by warm rain, their thick snowpack melting fast. Shaw's database designers had added new colors to the flood danger indication thermometer. It wasn't red at the top anymore, but purple, dark purple. But that was good, right? All that water would flow into the Athabasca and the North Saskatchewan to be captured by Mother Shaw reservoirs. That was money in the bank for the good mother, and water for all her people from Jasper to Saskatoon and all the way down to the demilitarized zone at Red Deer. Stantec might have Calgary and Banff, but their rivers were nothing compared to Jasper's. The Bow, Clearwater, and South Saskatchewan just trickles, and Stantec's people only got droplets. Most of their water was contracted to the LDS Corporation in Utah. My great-grandmother always said, if you have a problem, tell it to your horse. Mistea flicked her ears. So I'll ask you, should I do this job from the back of a bike? Can I? What choice do you have? Sure, Belinda knew it was her own interior voice asking the question, but she answered it aloud. You and I could ride back north, beg Kip to take us on as a guide, haul trophy hunters from Japan and China to the Wilmore, and try like hell to find game for them to shoot, pretend like everything isn't changing. Everything's always changing. Yeah, I know. Tears rose to Belinda's eyes, cold, like the freshet coursing down the mountain slopes, lubricated by warm rain. Nothing stays the same. And I'm not young anymore, am I? Neither am I. Mestea, she said, you'll never die. The horse looked at Belinda with her big, brown, liquid eye. Nothing more sympathetic than a horse's gaze, with that tenderly etched, worried expression that humans only showed in tragic circumstances. On a horse it was always there. Sympathy, understanding, care. Mother Shaw takes care of her people, Belinda said finally. So I'll defend her water. If that means making myself a target on a damn hover quad, I'll do it. Belinda cupped her palm on the mare's whiskered chin, leaned in to press her lips on that warm and fragrant nose. But you're still my girl, Mestea. When the drones get me, you'll take me home.
Whew. Oh, that was gorgeous.
Thank you.
So the thing that I was reflecting on the whole way through that was, from the perspective of an American, all of the cities that I hear in fiction, even in short fiction, tend to be, U.S. cities, tend to be in some way related to, like, either here, the San Francisco area, or the New York City down to Washington, D.C., I guess Boston to D.C. corridor.
Yeah, right?
And just how very Canadian that was in a way that was just really delightful to me because, as we were talking about before the show, I've only really spent time in Ontario and a little bit in Quebec, but I recognize all of these city names from, Stan Rogers songs and from having friends all over Canada.
Yeah, it's really powerful to write about the area where you grew up when nobody else does. Mm-hmm. It feels really, really interesting. My first, I tried to before, and I only just managed to start successfully setting stories in this area of Alberta where I grew up, just in the mountains, Jasper Park and Banff. Only managed to just in the last couple of years do it. Published a story this past year in The Book of Dragons, which is a Jonathan Strahan anthology that was set in 1983 when I was, in high school in my hometown. And it's pretty personally powerful. It feels good on the inside. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the primary modes I was writing in when I started writing with my aim to get published was urban fantasy, and I set everything pretty much in Philadelphia for that same sort of reason that, like, New York City gets everything.
Yeah.
Boston gets things, DC gets things, and certainly in the science fiction space, I'd never really seen Philadelphia represented at all.
Yeah, and that's so strange because there are so many writers who live in Philadelphia, right? And science fiction writers.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I was around the former editorial staff of Amazing Stories, and I mean, Fran Wilde lives in Philly. We've got all these folks.
Yeah. It's weird. I have had this theory for quite a long time that cities like Toronto, like Philly, they should be paying writers to write stories about it because stories bring people into the city. Like, I don't go, dream about visiting London because I like the architecture. I visit that because of the stories that I've read that are set there. It's become this place in my imagination because of what I've read about the dramas, makes a place attractive, makes a place real. So, yeah, I think it's really important to write about places that don't get written about.
Even if you immediately blow them up. I right after I moved to Oakland, where I live now, I started reading Mira Grant, Shauna McGuire's Newsflesh series, and in the beginning of the second book, which is Deadline, like page 5 or something, they blow up West Oakland. And I was just sitting there, and I had also just recently read Little Brother by Cory Doctorow at the time, and that book takes place in San Francisco, but one of the inciting events of the story is that the Bay Bridge gets blown up.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I get setting things in San Francisco, but it was like, I had lived in California for less than a year and had read more stories that were set in the area I was living than I had ever read in the 2.5 decades living in Philadelphia.
Yeah. No, it's important things for sure.
It's really a trip hearing this story that you just read, because of the way that it takes on a lot of sort of science fiction, and especially like near future dystopic science fiction conventions in a way that at once felt very familiar to me, and also because it was focused in Canada, which I think about Canada abstractly a fair bit, but concretely not very much.
Well, that's the thing, right? Setting really matters, especially in science fiction. If you don't have a setting in your science fiction story, you don't have a story. So
it's so true.
Yeah, and that's probably another reason why the story didn't sell is that the dystopic thing is a little generic. But whatever, that's fine.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like, we write these stories, to sell them, but we write them for ourselves first, because if I can't get my heart into a story, I'm not going to finish it.
Yeah. It's got to mean something to you. We don't just toss it off. For sure. And it's a thrill. When I read the story to the people at the conference that Alex and I were working at, they all knew these place names, and like they'd never seen them, heard of them in a story before. And the Mother Shaw and the Stantec, these are big, local corporations, Shaw Broadcasting and Stantec Engineering. So it was really, it was definitely a way to get them on side in the story, is to put these big corporations as the big bads, the big corporate overlords. And even something as small as the horse's name, Mistea, is I wanted a local Stoney Indian name, and for the Stoney First Nation tribe, and Mistea is the name of a creek that is in the area, and it's something that they recognize too. So these vowels that pop up in place names all over the area, and it's kind of cool. So thanks, I'm glad you liked it.
I think without having known that fact, it sort of resonated to me because, where I grew up in Philadelphia, most of the place names, they're like, I just recently saw a map again of like Philadelphia place names and where they came from, and a good third of all the names of places in Philadelphia are from the Lenape tribe.
Oh, really?
The Delaware people by European settlers. But all of the names in Philadelphia, we have Pennsylvania Dutch names, we have Lenape names, and then we have names from, various European settlers from all around the UK. But a lot of the names that we have are very much like, you're going up to Manayunk. We have, all of these just like very specific names that put you immediately in that place that, like, yes, these are, this is the greater Algonquin area, and these are the vowels they use, and these are, so knowing that connection is really neat, to have that sort of place and to acknowledge the people who were there before.
Yeah, and who are still there, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. It is very, I know that we as two white people are not really equipped to speak to the issues of First Nations peoples, but it's very easy to think of Native Americans in the abstract for me, because, we had a series of presidents who just moved them farther and farther west.
Yeah, no, for sure. When I write about my home area, I actively try not to ignore the fact that First Nations people are still there. That they were, when I lived there, my neighbors, my friends, and their lives and their traditions still very, very alive. So when I write something set in my hometown area, the character's almost always First Nations. As a white person, that's questionable. But honestly, to ignore the fact that those people exist in that landscape and belong to that landscape in a way that I never did, would be worse. So, yeah. For better or worse, that's the situation.
It is.
Yeah.
There are always thorny things to deal with in art, and to pretend that art is non-political, I think, is the worst way to go about it.
Oh, yeah. No, it can never be non-political. No, not a chance. Yeah. Yeah.
So, you talked a little bit about writing this story from coming out of being, I guess, sort of artists in residence at this conference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that experience, because I think that's one that not a lot of people ever even think about.
Oh, yeah, it's very cool. If you get the chance to do any futurist consulting, jump on it. So yeah, this is something that a lot of science fiction writers do. Either occasionally, or sometimes a lot as an actual profession. Karl Schroeder is a futurist. Do you know Karl Schroeder, science fiction novelist? He's from Toronto. He works as a futurist for IBM. And Madeline Ashby has a futurist consulting company. And that's, one of her major, day-to-day pursuits. So it's a very cool thing. Alex and I have done it a couple of times through a consulting company, kind of like a cool, tech consulting company in Waterloo, Ontario. We just got the gig because of a friend of a friend, which is a pretty awesome way to get a gig, I must say. And so they flew us to Banff. We got to stay at the Banff Centre for the Arts, which is the Canadian mecca for artistic, retreats, that sort of thing. So it was the first time Alex and I have ever been there. And so it felt pretty cool being there and being paid to be there. It was pretty neat.
For sure.
So what they did was they had, what they were trying to do is the group was trying to do long-term visioning. Noted all of these NGOs in the last couple of years have realized that 2030 is coming really close, is coming really
soon. It's
so soon. 2030, my God, right? So what they were doing was they were looking at the next 15 years of change while looking back and seeing how much change has happened in the past 15 years. So they were trying to vision where things are going. And what ended up happening was the people who are facilitating the group split everyone up into 4 different groups, and then assigned a science fiction writer to each group. And they were all basically had gone through this huge process to start thinking about the future and thinking about, extrapolating what sort of things they might see in the future. And I ended up being assigned to the group that basically had the dystopia scenario, the worst the worst case scenario. So that's always fun. You really want to get that one because that's the fun.
That seems like in a lot of ways not only the most fun but also the easiest.
It is.
That you really get to think like, okay, well, I know something terrible is going to happen, and now I just get to come up with creative ways to make it as terrible as possible.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. It was awesome. Yeah.
Thinking about that reminds me of the Futurescapes Workshop and the first Futurescapes anthology, which came out 3-4 years ago. I don't remember when exactly now, but it was very much focused on sort of future visioning, specifically of urban landscapes, and figuring out what like the governments of the future could look like and things like that.
Interesting.
And I did some work slushing for that, and so I got to read a lot of the entries, and some of the winning entries were just like amazing ideas in terms of like what's coming out of it. And so I don't tend for myself to do a lot of that sort of future thinking because I work in technology, and so I do a fair bit of just like, what's in the next year sort of thinking in terms of what terrible things technology is going to do.
Oh no.
But I think that role of being a futurist is really neat.
It is. It's a lot of fun. And when you can toss off a 1,500 word story in an afternoon and then read it to these people you've been talking to all day, they look at you like you're a freaking magician. It's so cool. It's like they have no idea how you just did what you did. I loved it.
Yeah. That is, that's one of the things that I've always sort of taken for granted even before I won't say before I became a writer, but before I decided to pursue writing is, and, obviously it's not the same for everybody, but I think the facility that we can have with words is something that we might take for granted a lot of the time.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and even not just the facility with creating words, but also with reading. Like, how many people are really not all that great at reading comprehension kind of stuns me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being an expert reader is a really good skill.
It is. It's something, it's another thing that takes practice, but it's one of those things that, unlike so many things, you can practice it anywhere. You can, work on it, and it's something that's very interesting for me because I used to really balk at, like, I would practice reading things when I was in my creative writing program in college, and, our teachers would always say, like, you've got to read things out loud so that you know how they sound, so that you can catch things.
Right.
And I would always really balk at it because I just, like, was resistant to the sound, like, hearing the sound of my own voice.
Oh, really?
And just sort of got over that at some point.
Yeah. At some point, you get used to hearing your. And when I first started recording podcasts with people, my voice sounded so strange in my ears when I would listen to it again, and it doesn't anymore. Like, you get used to it, right? So,
yeah,
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's certainly by, I think, the first half of season 1 of this show, I had, like, become completely inured to the sound of my own voice, and I was just like, yep. That's what I sound like.
There we go. It's not weird anymore.
Like, I know
it's
that
not
I have my
alien.
inside... Yeah. I have my inside me voice, and I have my outside me voice, and I know what both of those sound like.
Yeah,
and I don't have a problem with either of them now.
There we go. Excellent. Personal growth.
Yeah. Oh. Personal growth. It's nice to hear you bring up podcasting because it is... I feel like it's a related skill to writing.
Sure.
In some ways. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experiences with podcasting, because you came at it from a different angle than I did.
Oh, yeah. Well, just as a podcast guest. Getting invited to record podcasts with people, quite a few over the last 6 years. So, which is pretty fun and pretty cool. It's always great. It's always super great to chat with people who are passionate about the same things that you are. Talk, when people give you the opportunity to talk about yourself and your own work, that's a real gift, right? Like, I'm not the kind of I don't have the kind of ego where I think everybody is super interested in everything I have to say. But if you invite me on your podcast, obviously you are interested, and I can just kind of lean back and la 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 tell you everything. Hoo, hoo, hoo. Yeah.
It wasn't until this past year, I've been, now making podcasts for 2 years, and it was only in the last, 6 months that I started getting invited on other people's podcasts and, sitting on the other side of it. So it's really interesting to me getting that experience now.
It's super fun, and podcasts really are the medium of the right now.
They are.
Alex and podcasts have been saving us. We have survived the pandemic through 3 things. Podcasts, virtual reality. We've both got Oculus goggles. They are amazing for, we live in a small apartment, but really the whole world is our oyster when we've got those goggles on. It's fantastic. And Korean TV shows.
Yep.
That's our trifecta of surviving the pandemic.
Yeah. For me, it's been podcasting, Animal Crossing, and we live in a fairly quiet neighborhood that we have a perfect 1 mile loop.
Oh, nice.
That we can just go around our set of blocks in half an hour. Just take half an hour from our work day to go on a walk, and we have our dog friends who we see along the way.
Nice. Oh, that's lovely. That's a really good ritual.
It's really, I think especially now, one of the I don't want to call it blessings in disguise, but one of the things that I've tried to take that is positive out of the pandemic situation is learning these new coping strategies. And I think that's really important as an artist because it's such a solitary thing to be doing.
Yeah, you're alone a lot and alone in your own head a lot. And it can be it can be a bit much sometimes. You get a little weird after a while. Being in your head.
You really do.
I had to write a story in a month. Had to write a 15,000 word story in a month. And this was to fulfill I don't write that fast usually. Usually stories take me a good, 3 months. The story that I just read, having written that in a day, completely not usual for me.
Yeah.
So I had to fulfill a contract, because something came up really quickly. Had to write this story in a month. And, I found that towards the end of the month, I had gotten really strange. And all of my personal inhibitions had gone away. I realized this when I was sitting in the office having a meeting with my boss at the conference table, and realized that I was leaning back in my chair and I had my feet up on the table. And I was just that relaxed and that in my own head that I did not realize that I was completely inappropriate. Luckily, my boss is a really tolerant guy. Oh well.
Yeah. It is you do get into a weird state sometimes, though, when you spend so much time with words that are inside your head and worlds that are inside your head.
Yeah. A weird state and a necessary state. I think it's necessary for creating, which is why a lot of us had or continue to have, but especially at the beginning of the pandemic, had a lot of creative struggles, is because something else was in our head, this panic, this unfamiliar sensation of what the hell is going on. We don't know. So, our normal storytelling brain was not online because of this weird external situation.
Yeah, it took me, I did a Weekend Warriors style Flash thing for, I think, in conjunction with the Codex Flash
right.
Weekend Warriors, but not with Codex,
yeah.
Which I'm not a member of, but I did that last year right before the pandemic and wrote 2 or 3 Flash stories that everybody else told me, oh yeah, this is a great outline of a novel, and I felt really great about that. I was like, I've done some creating. I hadn't really, for a variety of reasons in 2019 with changing jobs and living situations and just and starting this podcast, I hadn't done really any fiction writing in 2019, and I came into 2020 and I banged out these stories and I was like, this is going to be great, and then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And I didn't write any more fiction until... That's not true. I wrote fiction, I wrote fanfic right after the end of She-Ra. But I didn't write any other fiction. I wrote, these 3 Flash stories in January, February, and then I didn't write anything until May, and then I didn't write anything until November when I did NaNoWriMo, and it was
right.
It took that much time to find how to do writing in this new space.
Yeah, and I think that's typical for a lot of writers, and it's also okay. It's fine. It's okay. We're not, our worth doesn't hinge on how many words we put out per year. It really doesn't.
Yep.
So, if people are having a tough time, well, it is a tough time right now. And I think the main thing is just try and survive and not, make yourself as happy as you possibly can be. And for a lot of people, that is going to include writing. And for some people, it's not. And that's fine.
Yeah.
You're still a writer if you don't write in a year.
That's really hitting on the whole thesis of this show, which I appreciate you being the one to say it, because I feel like so often I'm just cranking the same old handle. But that, it really is it's okay to trunk things. It's okay to not write things for a year or 2 years or a month or a week or however long to have dry spells.
Yeah, or to spend decades of your life trying to write, or trying to figure out how to write, or trying to get your brain, or trying to get the voices in the back of your head to shut up enough so that you can write. I spent decades doing that. I didn't publish my first story. I didn't learn how to write a decent story until 2013. But I had been trying to be a writer for years. And sometimes it just freaking takes a long time.
Yeah.
So and that's okay, because we're in it to write good stories. Like for me, that's the thing. I want to write a good story. I don't want to write just any old story. I want to write a good story. And figuring out a way that I can write a good story took a long time. And it was worth it, because I'm the happiest person in the world right now, because I figured out how to do the thing that I was hoping I'd be able to do, when I was a teenager.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's really great. And it is, I mean, I think one of the other hard things is that it's so easy to get focused on other people's rate of success. Yeah. Well, and my wife is a writer, and Alex has been a professionally published science fiction writer since 1995. And Alex focuses on writing like with a laser sight. And I always found that super intimidating, because I couldn't be that way. I didn't have that kind of self-confidence that Alex has always had. So when I saw Alex's way of working and looked at myself and went, why aren't you doing that? It's like, because that's not me, right? And it wasn't a jealousy thing or anything like that. It was just wow, if that's what it takes, then I'm never going to do it, right? But then, I realized that, there isn't ever just one way of doing things. Right.
You have to find your own way. And that way is not going to look like anyone else's. No two sculptors work the same. No two painters work the same. Poets, playwrights, we all do it completely differently. It's because we're individual people who have to figure out what goes on up here in the skull. We have to figure out our own way of working, our own practice, artistic practice.
And I think that applies even outside of the traditional arts.
Yes.
That everybody has, and that, that's something that I struggled with in school, is like, I didn't respond to the traditional school stimuli.
Yeah, of course.
Or,
yeah, that makes sense too.
Like all of these things, there is so much individualism, and it's very easy for us to be down on ourselves when we don't conform to what is being held as the right way to do the thing.
Right. Yes, absolutely. But in fact, there is no one right way. Yeah. And it's important. The thing that we do is important. Storytelling is just absolutely the most important thing in the world. So, if it takes a person a long time to figure out how to do it, that is what it should be, because it's a really super important thing. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yep.
So, there we go.
Yeah, for sure.
That's my pep talk.
Yeah.
Kelly's pep talk. Do the thing.
Do the thing.
Do it.
I think sort of in conjunction with this, that this blue police box just showed up in the room behind me, and maybe we can take a step into this time machine, and if there are any specific words of wisdom that you would like to offer to past Kelly.
So my word of wisdom is write it. If you don't write it, it will never exist. So, yeah. It's important to make things exist. You've got to manifest it.
It is. And that's, I think that's a lesson that takes a long time to learn in some cases.
Yeah.
Going on that model, this podcast happened because I realized that nobody else was going to make the podcast I wanted to be listening to.
Right. This is the content these are the questions that you wanted to be asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, like, you know, this is the writing content, this is the writing podcast I wish had been around when I was, you know, a young writer just getting started.
Yeah, but the internet didn't exist then.
Yeah.
Did it?
Well, I mean, the internet as it is now certainly didn't exist then. I started writing in 2005 when, you know, social media was MySpace and Facebook was like this weird new thing that was just on the horizon just for college students.
Yeah. Yeah, and yet that was only 15 years ago, right?
And that is just banana pants.
Isn't that crazy? What are we going to be doing in 2035?
Yeah.
Don't know. Nobody knows. But it's going to be really different because the pace of change just keeps speeding up.
It is. It's so, I think, important to think about that, though, and I think a lot of people are held back by just thinking about what is here and now and what is possible within existing frameworks rather than imagining new frameworks.
Well, and that was one of the things that was really interesting about the consulting, the futurist consulting things we did, is I think that though everyone is focused on thinking about the future, what it really helped them do was think about now. Like to conceptualize now, to accept that changes are happening now. Which, you know, that's humans resist thinking about what is happening now, right?
Yeah.
Because it can seem so complex. But the world that we're living in right now, that is manifesting under us as we speak, is the future. We're already living in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, businesses especially, you know, a lot of them are living in the world of quite a ways ago, actually.
Yeah.
Because they can't handle the now. They can't conceptualize it. So if we think about the future, we're really thinking about the now.
It's, you know, it's really great to hear you say that. One of the things that always bothered me in when I was getting a writing education was there was always this focus on, like, you know, you have to write literary fiction, and we don't dabble in the genres unless we are going to transcend the genre, which is, you know, some silly bullshit that they say about people who, in a lot of cases, are dead and can't, you know, tell those people to just go stuff it anymore.
That's right.
But I always had this conception that, like, no, the science fiction, the fantasy is absolutely vital because it lets us talk about the now with sort of an abstraction layer.
Yeah. And use concrete metaphors to get at some really scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like science fiction, fantasy are the genres that have the widest spectrum of colors available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, when we talk about the literature canon, you know, most of those books are genre in some way. I'm sorry, but Moby Dick is an adventure book, right? Like,
yeah, Frankenstein is the first science
fiction novel. I mean, these books are all of them. If you look at any of those lists, they're all genre. It's artificial and it's snobbery, and it's part of it is universities have to feel as though they're up in some, you know, their nose is higher in the air than somebody else's. So I don't know. We'll get over it someday.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think probably less than 5 years from now, we'll be seeing things that were published 5-10 years ago in genre being taught widely.
At
least I hope so.
I hope so too, because there's so much great stuff.
I just finished reading An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon, and it is such an incredibly present book
for
being a far future.
So good. So good. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's listeners, if you are thinking about checking out An Unkindness of Ghosts, please know, content warning for a lot of things. But it is just an incredible, incredible book. And, I'm looking forward to seeing what Rivers has to tell us in the future, because I know that it's going to be incredible.
Yeah. Gimme. Can we jump in that time travel thing that you've got there behind you? And, yeah, go get those
I think it
books.
Only goes backwards, unfortunately.
Damn it. That's too bad. I should have given myself lottery numbers.
Yeah. So we can do a little bit of future thinking, because Alias Space is coming out from Subterranean Press on April 30th.
That's right. Yes, this is my first collection of short stories. It's really exciting. Subterranean is a really fantastic publisher. They've been so lovely to me, so great to work with. And the cover is beautiful. I got to work with the artist, Lauren St. Ong, pretty directly. It's the book of my dreams. So one of the things about going with, or if one should be so lucky and fortunate to get an offer from Subterranean for your book, is they really want to put out the book that you want to put out. You can basically tell them, this is my vision, this is exactly what I want, and they'll be like, no problem, we'll make that happen. Really good people. Super excited. It's a really huge book. It's 450 pages. Hardcover, yeah. Hardcover, it's a hardcover limited signed edition. So I had to sign 1,200 pages.
Oh, fantastic.
It was really
and tiresome.
Fun. It was really neat. I was surprised at how fun it was. I really enjoyed it. It was a good time. But yeah, it took a week. And it has all of this. It has stories. The stories that are in it were all, it has my first published story from 2015. And it has all of my best stories in the past 6 years. And it has an original story called Alias Space. Which,
awesome.
Yeah, which is kind of a play on the title of a Margaret Atwood book called Alias Grace.
Neat.
Yeah, and coming up with that title was when I got my groove back during the pandemic. I was working, I had a deadline, I was working on the story, and I was really feeling like there's just no juice going in my writer brain right now. But I got out my trusty huge sketch pad. This is one of my best writing tools. It's a huge sketch pad with which I make a lot of mess.
Oh, fabulous.
I think best when my hands are moving and when I'm doodling. So I doodle and doodle and doodle, and I write down my thoughts and I make a big mess. And when I came up with the title Alias Space, that's when I knew things were starting to move again.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the story is set in Toronto, and it's basically about how Toronto became the street burlesque capital of the world. Street burlesque performance capital of the world. It's a lot of fun.
Well, listeners, be sure to pre-order Alias Space from your local independent bookseller, wherever possible. Links, as always, will be in the show notes. Kelly, before we go, where can listeners find you elsewhere?
I'm constantly on Twitter at Kelly Yo-Yo, KELLYOYO is my handle, and also at Instagram at the same handle.
Fantastic. And I would highly recommend following in both locations. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute blast.
Oh, thanks so much, Hillary. It's been a really good time. It's been nice to visit with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, looking forward to the far-flung future of hopefully just 6 months from now when we'll be able to travel and meet in person and have the big science fiction meetups that we dream of.
Oh, that would be so great. I would love that so much. Let it happen. Let it happen.
It'll be here.
Okay, good.
I trust all shall be well again.
Yes, let's trust it.
Yeah. Listeners, join us again next month when our guest will be Nino Cipri. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Ryan Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Twitter at Trunkcast, and I tweet at HBBisnieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.